When they come for you, the dying woman whispered, show them the cloth first, then the ring. Never the other way around. Nobody in the salt town of Ufaro understood those words. Nenna did not understand them either. 22 years old, standing barefoot at the edge of a borrowed mat, watching her mother leave a world that had given neither of them anything worth keeping. Old, dull gold, scratched on every surface except the inside of the band, where something was carved too small for ordinary eyes to read. That was the ring. Back into the hem it went, wrapped, tight, invisible to every eye but hers. 6 years passed. What she carried in that worn hem was about to bring the most powerful people in the kingdom of Ufaro to their knees. Welcome. And before this fire burns any higher, drop your city in the comments right now. Tell me where in the world you are watching from tonight. This story is crossing borders I did not expect, and I want to know exactly who it is finding. Now, Ufaro. 6 years Nenna had worked in the salt compound of Madame Ozina. 6 years of grinding, measuring, hauling, and receiving insults in the place where wages should have been. Madame Ozina ran the Eastern Salt House the way a drought runs a riverbed, by removing everything that should have been flowing through it. She docked pay for cracked measuring bowls. She docked pay for shadows of late arrivals. Even when the compound's own gatekeeper had locked Nenna out past the curfew bell. Her ledger of invented debts sat on its own shelf in the storeroom, thick as a judgment, and she referenced it with the authority of a woman who has told her own lies long enough to believe them completely. Ego and Neka, Madame Ozina's 2 senior workers, carried that cruelty further than Madame Ozina herself ever bothered walking. They corrected Nenna's salt packing technique, the same technique she had been doing perfectly for 3 years before either of them arrived. Cold mornings sent her to the far market. The motherless one, that was their name for her, delivered in a tone that made the phrase cut deeper than its words ever could. Pack the salt, carry the loads, arrive early, leave late, eat the day's end scraps standing up so the compound could close on time. 28 years old, completely alone. Every night, before sleeping, her fingers found the ring sewn into her hem. The only thing in this world ever given to her with love. She touched it. She slept. She rose before dawn and did it all again. Her name was Nenna Udo, and she had not always lived this low. Not so far back that memory had let it soften, but far enough back that happiness felt borrowed from another woman's life. There had been a room, 2 mats, a cooking stone. One window catching afternoon light at exactly the right angle, throwing a warm square onto the floor where Nenna used to sit and oil her hair while her mother talked. Ghazi had worked the small salt stalls at the outer market, the thin-margined stalls where a woman of no family name and no husband's protection could still stand upright and call herself a trader. Poor, yes. Free, absolutely. She answered to no compound gate, no madam's ledger, no man's permission slip. Rise at the 3rd cockerel, return when the cloth bundle was empty, and on the good evenings bring back enough for 2 bowls and a story told over the fire. Those stories were always the same unfinished shape. Your blood is not from here, Ngozi would say, watching the fire rather than Nenna's face. Your blood is older than this town and deeper than any salt road, and one day someone will come who knows how to name it. Then she would stop the way you stop at a door you are not yet ready to open. Not yet, she always added, not yet. Nenna had believed her completely, the way a daughter believes her mother, without requiring a single piece of evidence. Then the fever arrived in Nenna's 22nd year and took Ngozi in 9 days flat, and belief cracked open because there was no longer anyone left to hold it together. After death came the unraveling. The landlord reclaimed the room within a week. Market neighbors were kind for 3 days and then busy. A distant cousin offered floor space for 1 season before that floor became unavailable. Hunger teaches a woman the exact value of her connections, and what Nenna learned was that hers were worth 1 season's floor and nothing beyond it. Then came Madame Ozina's gate, the ledger, and 6 years of earned poverty that never once shrank no matter how hard she worked. Through every single day of it, the ring stayed sewn into her hem, never worn, never shown. Ngozi had not said to wear it, she had said to show it, in the right order, at the right time, to the right person. That person's name was not yet known to her. Here is what the salt compound never managed to take from her. Every seventh-day market, a blind old woman named Mama Titi sat near the outer stall row with a small enamel bowl, selling nothing, simply sitting with the quiet dignity of someone who had already sold everything else and made peace with it. Compound girls walked past her in a line on supply errands. Ego stepped over the bowl one morning without slowing. Nneka looked at the woman the way you look at something you have decided not to see. Nena stopped. Her entire morning meal, not a portion, all of it, went into that enamel bowl. Then she crouched down and said good morning the way you say it to a person, not a charity case. And she asked how Mama Titi's knees were holding in the dry season cold. Sightless eyes turned toward the sound of that voice, and something in the old woman's face shifted. Not surprise exactly, but the slow recalibration of a person who stopped expecting warmth and has suddenly, unexpectedly received it. 3 months later, a different kind of test arrived. Tobena, a young salt apprentice from the northern compound, barely 18, new to the trade roads, made a mistake in his weight measurements and shorted a senior merchant by 4 full measures. That merchant wanted the boy's position and 2 months of his wages. The compound manager was leaning toward agreeing, because in Uforo, senior merchants were not disappointed without someone paying for it. Nena stepped forward. Quietly, without theater, she offered to cover the shortage from her own next market earnings. To Tobena alone, she said, "Pay me back when you can. Learn the weights better." He looked at her the way a person looks when handed something they have no name for. Then there was the morning she arrived early and found Nneka, her daily tormentor, sitting alone on the grinding stone in the gray pre-dawn, crying the way a person cries when they are certain no one is watching. Raw, unguarded, exhausted, not a word at breakfast, no stored ammunition, no private victory replayed later that evening. Water and a quiet hand placed beside Nneka. That was all. No words. Back to the first fire, Ghazi had told her once when Nena was young enough to confuse mercy with weakness. A woman who gives only when giving costs her nothing is not giving. She is posing. 28 years old, paid in ledger debt and insults, carrying a ring whose meaning she still did not fully understand. Nena Udo had never once posed. Mazi Dyke did not visit the Eastern Salt Compound for Salt Royal Historian of Uforo, keeper of the palace's official records, the man whose reed pen had written every birth, death, and succession into the kingdom's permanent archive for 31 years. Respected the way sharp instruments are respected, carefully, from a glad distance. Nobody questioned his work because his work was the foundation everything else stood on. Challenge the historian's records, and you challenge the kingdom's memory itself. And in Uforo, memory was law. His route through the Eastern Market had not changed in 12 years. 4 months ago, it changed. He began stopping at the outer stall row. Small purchases of salt he did not need. Eyes moving across the compound workers between the stalls, doing what sharp instruments do, which is cut without appearing to move. 3 separate mornings, Nena felt a gaze on her back that raised every hair at the base of her neck. 3 times she turned and caught nothing but the tail end of an old man's walking staff disappearing into the market crowd. Nobody at the compound thought anything of it. Senior men passed through markets. Senior men bought salt. Senior men looked and moved on. Something about it stayed with her. Growing up in Uforo's outer edges teaches a lesson early and permanently. Attention from powerful men is rarely about admiration. When she finally caught Mazi Dyke's eyes fully, held them for 1 full second before he looked away, what she found in them was not the expression of a man discovering something pleasant, cold, calculating, confirmatory. Those were the eyes of a man who already knew something, had feared it for a long time, and had just found it exactly where he did not want it to be. Harmattan brought traders from 3 directions every dry season, and the Uforo outer market filled with strangers. For the 8 trading days before the Salt Council met, Malam Haruna was not most of them. 40 years on the dry country trade roads between Uforo and the kingdom of Adama had given him the unhurried certainty of a man who made peace with dust and distance long ago. He set up his cloth bales at the outer stall row's edge on the third trading day, calling his wares, talking prices, reading the crowd the way experienced traders read weather. When Nanena walked past him, carrying a double load of packed salt toward the weighing station, mid-sentence he stopped, his customer waited, then turned to find the cause, then turned back to an empty face, because Malam Haruna's expression had gone somewheres deep and internal, the way a man's face goes when memory and reality collide without warning. Not fear, not shock. Something older and slower, the expression of a person who has been carrying a thing in their mind for a very long time and has just, completely unprepared, walked directly into the living version of it. "Madam?" His voice cut clean across the market noise. "Please, one moment slowing," she turned. Traders called to compound women all morning long. "Your hem," Malam Haruna said, "left side. The weight of what is sewn there. I can see it pulling the cloth." Every muscle in Anena's body went still in the middle of the moving market, because she had carried that ring for 6 years and not one single person had ever noticed it through the fabric. "What are you talking about?" she said carefully. "Something a woman carries when she does not yet understand what it would cost her to set it down." His eyes were steady, unhurried. "Once in my life I have seen that shape before, and the man wearing it then was not the kind of man whose ring passes to a salt compound worker without a very serious story behind the passing. A loose circle of people had gathered, the kind that forms whenever a voice carries unusual weight in a public space. "Tell me your mother's name," Malam Haruna said. She told him. The name hit his face the way Harmattan wind hits a lamp, sudden, total, and it went the color of ash before she had finished the second syllable. "Ngozi," he said quietly. Not a question. A confirmation arriving from somewhere very far back. Then he raised his voice just enough for everyone standing nearby to hear every word. "That ring belongs to the House of the Salt Throne." He did not leave her standing there with the crowd pressing in from all sides. Malam Haruna lifted his cloth bales himself. No apprentice, no hesitation, and said quietly, "Walk with me." Then moved through the market at the deliberate pace of a man who has made a decision and cannot be hurried either into it or out of it. Nena walked beside him. The salt load stayed on her back because she did not yet know what else to do with her hands. Rhett House courtyard at the market's far edge. That was where he took her. Far enough from the trading day that its noise reached only as a murmur. 2 old men played a board game under a neem tree and paid attention to nothing beyond their pieces. "Set the salt down," Malam Haruna said. "Just for now." She set it down. 6 years in Madame Ozina's compound, and nobody had once given her permission to put something down. Silence sat between them while the board game elders finished a round and started another. Deep-lined eyes. Hands roughened by 40 seasons of road dust. Malam Haruna had the weight of a man who has received news he did not know how to carry and is still deciding how to hand it to someone else without breaking them. "Your mother," he said finally, "I knew her before she came to Uforo, before she became who she became here." He spoke Ngozi's full name, the complete name, the one Nanena had only ever heard her mother use once, on a pain-unlocked night years ago. Ngozi Eze Uforo. That second name is not a market woman's name. Eze means daughter of a throne, and Uforo is this kingdom's own name, which means her father did not come from the market rows. He came from the palace. The neem tree moved in the dry wind. Ngozi was the daughter of the man who last sat the salt throne before the council took it. Malam Haruna continued, his voice dropping to something careful and deliberate. "She fled with you when you were 4 years old. She went somewhere no one thought to look. Nobody found her." He paused. "Until she died." Nanena had not cried since Ngozi's burial. Something cracked open in her chest regardless. Not loudly, without tears, the way a Harmattan dried wall cracks. Quietly, completely, all the way through to the other side. "Show me," he said. "Please." Practiced fingers reached into the hem fold and worked the ring loose. 1,000 times in darkness, never once in daylight, never once before another living person. Nenna placed it in her open palm and held it toward him. Malam Haruna did not reach for it immediately. First he looked, the way you look at something you were not certain still existed in the world. Then 2 fingers lifted it carefully, turning it toward the dry season light. His lips moved, reading. The inside of the band, that carving too fine for ordinary eyes, the one that had always looked to Nenna like rough scratches left by handling. Angled correctly in the light, she could see for the first time that they were not scratches at all. Letters. A name or a declaration somewhere between the two. Precise, deliberate, cut by a tool that knew its purpose exactly. Ez Ufuro Naka, Malam Haruna read quietly. The pure salt throne. Every legitimate heir of the founding line received this inscription. Given at birth, carried until death, passed to the firstborn when the bearer knew survival was no longer possible. He looked up from the ring directly into her face. My father's trading partner, your grandfather, showed me this exact inscription in this exact ring when I was 22 years old and new to these roads. He told me something that morning I never forgot. What did he tell you? Nenna asked. He said, if you ever see this ring again on any hand, it means the line survived. Malam Haruna set the ring gently back into her palm and closed her fingers around it. 40 years I traded these roads. 1,000 rings on 1,000 hands. His voice dropped to barely a breath. Not once did I see it again. The board game elders finished another round beneath the neem tree. A goat crossed the far courtyard wall. Ordinary afternoon light fell across an extraordinary thing sitting in an ordinary woman's unremarkable hands. Before the sun had moved 2 hand-widths across the sky, Mazi Dyke walked into the rest house courtyard, unhurried, composed. His face arranged into something Nenna had never seen on it during those 3 mornings of market surveillance. Warmth. Genuine-looking concern. The expression of a senior man who has heard difficult news and come personally, purely out of care to make sure a young woman was being properly looked after. He nodded briefly to Malam Haruna. The brisk acknowledgement of a man noting an inconvenience, then sat across from Nenna and began speaking in the measured tone of someone who has rehearsed his compassion carefully. Her situation was understandable, he said. In Ngozi's story, it always caused him personal pain, he said. A comfortable position existed in the Northern Salt House, well supervised, properly fed, better compensated than anything Madame Ozina had ever offered, and it could be arranged within the week if certain matters were handled with the discretion they deserved. What matters? Nenna asked. His eyes moved to her closed fist. The ring carries complicated history, he said carefully. The claims it appears to suggest, and I say appears, because these things demand very careful examination before any conclusion, could cause considerable pain to innocent people. People who have served this kingdom faithfully for decades. People whose entire lives would be overturned by what might turn out to be a misunderstanding. He folded both hands on the table. Nobody is asking you to deny anything. Only to be thoughtful. To wait. To allow the right people to examine this privately, quietly, without the market crowd drama that ultimately helps no one. Privately and quietly, Nenna understood, meant without her involvement. 6 years of ledger debt that never shrank sat behind her eyes, and Ngozi's voice sat behind that. Show them the cloth first, then the ring, in that order, never the other way. I will think about it, she told him. Mazi Dyke smiled and left. Already she had decided. There was nothing to think about. Malam Haruna had survived 40 years on dry country trade roads by understanding one principle above all others. A man who moves second but moves correctly will always arrive before the man who moved first but moved wrong. Going directly to the Salt Elders' Council was the obvious move, which made it the wrong one. Direct approach handed Mazi Dyke 4 hours of warning, and a council chamber full of men who had been reading his records for 30 years without a single reason to doubt them. Tea houses came first instead. Ufuro's outer market tea houses were where the real record-keeping happened, not on archive tablets, but in the memories of women who had been feeding traders, clerks, messengers, and market day witnesses across decades. Three of those women Malam Haruna knew by name after 40 years of Ufaro trade. The oldest among them was Mama Chica, who had been pouring tea near the salt weighing station for 37 years, and whose memory was precise enough that elders occasionally consulted her when official records disagreed with each other. 2 cups of tea he did not want. An hour and a half of careful listening. What Mama Chica offered arrived in pieces, the way truth arrives when it has been sitting in careful silence, waiting for exactly the right question. Ngozi, of course she remembered Ngozi. Quiet woman, careful, bought tea at this spot every 8th day for 11 years and never once mentioned a family name until the fever came, and by then the right people were not there to hear it. She remembered the morning after Ngozi's death when a young palace clerk had moved through the market asking about the woman from stall 47, the one who had just passed. Debt collection, Mama Chica said, wrapping both hands around her cup. That was my first thought. But he wasn't asking what she owed. He was asking how long she had been in Ufaro. How long, like he needed a number to write down somewhere official. Completely still, that was what he went. That clerk, he said. Who sent him? Mama Chica looked at him across the rim of her cup with the flat, patient expression of a woman who has been waiting 31 years for someone to arrive and ask her this exact question. Pale blue sash, she said. Every clerk from the Royal Historian's office wears it. Same sash? Every one of them, all 31 years I have been sitting here. Malam Haruna left the tea house and went directly to find the palace workshop ledger, because in Mazi Dike's official archive, the death record filed for Ngozi Eze Ufaro carried a date 4 full years before she actually died. If this story has had you from the first word, if Nena's road has felt like a road you have walked yourself in some form, subscribe before the final truth arrives. Because what the blind woman of the outer market has been carrying for 24 years is the piece that locks everything shut permanently. Subscribe now. Then keep reading. Mama Titi was at her usual spot near the outer stall row when Malam Haruna found her, enamel bowl in her lap, sightless face turned toward the market noise with the untroubled patience of someone who has been waiting for the world to catch up with her for a very long time. He sat beside her on the ground and said, Ngozi's full name. Both hands went still around the bowl. 24 years, she said quietly after a long pause. I wondered how much longer. Her real name was not Mama Titi. Written into the palace workshop ledger, the one Mazi Dike had forgotten to have destroyed, because he did not believe anyone who could read it would survive. She was Adeyeze, royal weaver, appointed directly to the Salt Throne's household 40 years ago by Anena's own grandfather. During his entire reign, Adeyeze had woven every ceremonial cloth the throne produced, including the one that mattered most. A length of undyed cotton given to each legitimate heir at birth, the house name woven into its left border in dark-dyed thread, invisible under daylight, readable only when held directly to firelight, each letter placed by hand in a pattern known exclusively to the household. When the Salt Throne fell and Ngozi fled with 4-year-old Nena, Adeyeze had fled in the opposite direction, into the outer market, into a new name, into an enamel bowl, and 24 years of sitting close to stall 47, watching a girl grow up across the compound wall without being able to explain the pull that kept bringing her back to that exact spot season after season. Ngozi left you something besides the ring, Adeyeze said. Forward he leaned, saying nothing yet. When she knew the fever would take her, she came to me here. She had always known who I was. Recognized me the first year she arrived in Ufaro, even through the changed name and the dark glasses I wore then. She pressed a cloth bundle into my hands and said one thing. When someone comes asking the right questions in the right order, give it to them. From deep inside her outer wrapper, Adeyeze drew a bundle no larger than a folded head wrap. Inside lay a length of undyed cotton, aged, carefully kept, the kind of cloth preserved by someone who understands what it carries. In daylight, it appeared completely plain. No marking, no pattern, nothing that would mean anything to any eye passing over it casually. Adaeze held it toward Malam Haruna with the absolute certainty of a woman who has woven things that outlast the people who commissioned them. "Take it to the Salt Council chamber," she said. "Hold it to the fire burning in the northeast corner. The letters run along the left border, the house name, the mother's name, the daughter's name, and the birth date. Then at the border's very end, my weaver's mark." A pause, dry and final as old bark. The same mark registered in the palace workshop ledger under my real name. The ledger Mazi Dyke forgot to burn. Harmattan had stopped moving. Around them, the market continued its ordinary percussion, haggling voices, a goat's complaint, the knock of measuring bowls. And in the middle of all that ordinary noise, Adaeze sat with an empty enamel bowl and 24 years of patient waiting, and the truth sewn into cotton was finally, quietly, about to meet the fire that would make it visible. That evening, in Malam Haruna's rest house room, the three of them gathered around a single lamp. Adaze's hands guided the angle. Nena held the flame. Malam Haruna watched. Letters came up slowly, the way thread-woven letters emerge after years of lying flat, reluctant at first, stiff, like something waking from a sleep it had grown comfortable inside. Then all at once they were present, clear as a spoken declaration, the house name running along the left border in dark thread on undyed cotton. Below it, two names side by side, Ngozi Ezuforo mother, Nena Ezuforo daughter, a birth date. And at the border's very end, small and exact, a weaver's mark unlike anything a forger could manufacture, because it lived in one pair of hands only and nowhere else on earth. For the first time in her life, Nena read her own name in firelight. Adaeze could not see it. She needed no confirmation. "Is it there?" she asked. "It's there," Malam Haruna answered. One nod from Adaeze, a nod carrying 24 years of sitting near a market stall in an enamel bowl, waiting for exactly this question. "Tomorrow morning we go to the council." None of them slept before the third cockerel. Knocking came at the rest house gate. A young market runner, barely 15, breathless and wide-eyed, carrying urgent word from Mama Chica. He reported, stumbling over the words the way young people stumble over news that frightens them, that a palace runner had moved through the market after dark delivering sealed notices to every member of the Salt Elders Council. Each notice carried Mazi Dyke's official seal. The notice Mama Chica had intercepted and copied by hand. He read it twice, formal archive language. A forgery attempt involving an item falsely presented as Salt Throne property had been identified in the outer market. No names mentioned. All authentication hearings to be suspended, pending a full evidence review. Date of filing, that same afternoon, hours after Mazi Dyke had sat across from Nena in this very courtyard, offering her a comfortable position in the northern salt house. One hand had offered comfort. The other had already been preparing her destruction. Nena looked at the notice. Then at the cloth still spread across the table with her name woven into it. "We go earlier," she said. Salt Elders Council Hall stood at the palace quarters center, flanked by two permanent fires, one for the living decisions of each day, one for the ancestors whose word the living decisions were meant to reflect. 3 times in 40 years of Uforo trade, Malam Haruna had appeared before that council. Each time he had walked in carrying invoice records and cloth bales and been received as what he was, a legitimate, long-standing trade partner of the kingdom, a man whose word on matters of commerce was not questioned. This morning, 2 gate attendants in pale blue sashes blocked the entrance and said the council was in closed session pending a security matter. No outside parties would be admitted until the review concluded. Malam Haruna asked for Elder Okafor, the council's senior member, a man he had conducted honest business with for 16 years. Unavailable, the attendant said. Behind them, just inside the hall entrance, Mazi Dyke stood watching. Word had moved through the market since the previous day. The word Salt Throne, spoken publicly in the outer stalls, travel fast in a trade town, and a crowd had gathered at the council gate. Traders and palace workers and compound people, everyone following a story that had the particular electric quality of something true happening in real time. Turning to face the crowd, he did not shout. My name is Malam Haruna of Adama, he said. 40 years I have traded in Uforo. My father traded here before me. His father knew the man who sat the salt throne before the council took it. He paused one beat. Today I am standing at this gate with a woman whose name is Nena Eze Uforo, daughter of Ngozi Eze Uforo, granddaughter of the last Salt King, and I am asking this council to examine a cloth and a ring before deciding what to call her. Another pause, shorter, heavier. If I am wrong, he said clearly, I surrender my full season's trade license to this council and never return to Uforo. 40 years of earned standing staked this morning in front of every person at this gate. The crowd had grown considerably larger. Inside the hall, Elder Okafor had heard every word through the wall. Elder Okafor was 71 years old and had sat the Salt Council for 26 of them, and what made him valuable in that seat was something rare in men of his position. Genuine curiosity about the truth, even when the truth arrived inconveniently. He opened the hall himself, over the protests of the pale blue sash attendants, and stood in the entrance with his hands behind his back, looking at Malam Haruna, then at Anena, then at Adeze standing between them with the cloth bundle pressed against her chest. Come in, he said, all three. Mazi Dyke was already inside, positioned at the council table's left end, close to the senior members, occupying the seat of a man who belongs in every room he enters. When Nanena walked through the door, his face held the flat patience of someone waiting for an argument to finish, someone who already knows the outcome and is simply allowing the other side time to realize it. We need the fire, Malam Haruna said, laying the cloth and ring on the council table without ceremony. Two attendants carried a lamp from the northeast corner, the ancestor fire, burning there for 11 years, the one nobody touched except for the opening libation. Elder Okafor gave the nod. Nena held the cloth to the flame. Letters rose in the silence of a room where every elder had stopped breathing. One by one, the council members left their seats and moved toward the table, not for ceremony, but because the letters were small and they needed to be close enough to read them. Elder Okafor read aloud, character by character, slowly, the house name, Ngozi's name, Nanena's name, the birth date, and at the border's end, the weaver's mark. Who is the weaver? He asked. Adeze stepped forward and gave her real name, not Mama Titi of the outer market stall, but Adeze, royal weaver, appointed by the Salt King, registered in the palace workshop ledger, under the mark now visible at the cloth's border end. She asked for the ledger. 15 minutes passed while attendants searched, because nobody had opened it in 30 years. Page 7, there it was, the mark's registration, identical in every detail to what the firelight had just revealed. Then Malam Haruna placed one final document on the table. Mama Chica's copy, made by hand in careful tea-house script 31 years ago, when a pale blue sash clerk had frightened her enough to write down everything she witnessed. The copy showed Ngozi's official death entry, the wrong date, filed 4 full years early in Mazi Dyke's own recognizable hand. Slowly, like a turning tide, the council chamber turned toward Mazi Dyke. A clerical error, he said. His voice did not shake, which was the most alarming thing in the room. Records of outer market women are imprecise by nature. A street woman's death. She was not a street woman. Adeze's voice crossed the chamber, dry and final as harmattan wind. She was the daughter of the man who built this council its hall. Not one person moved. Not one voice rose. The ancestor fire in the northeast corner burned the way it had burned for 11 years steadily. Patiently, the way fire burns when it has been keeping the same truth warm for a very long time. Waiting for the morning, someone finally brought the cloth close enough to read it. 3 days the confirmation required. The Salt Council's law demanded it. 3 full days of cross-examination, cross-reference, and the slow, deliberate grinding of elders who had been given reason to be certain and intended to be certain before speaking. On the 4th morning, Elder Okafor stood at the ancestor fire and read the ruling into the flame so that what was spoken there could not afterward be unspoken. Nena Eze Uforo, granddaughter of the founding Salt King, legitimate heir of the original Salt throne line, wrongfully obscured through falsified records, now confirmed by Cloth, Ring, Adieza's testimony, and the Palace Workshop ledger. What followed Mazi Dyke was proportional and permanent. The investigation turned up letters in his private storage. Correspondence with the council faction that had removed Nenena's grandfather from the Salt Throne through political maneuvering decades earlier, letters confirming 31 years of paid silence. He had not acted from pure malice. He had acted from salary, which in certain ways made everything worse. His position was stripped, his archive seal dissolved, his pension canceled. Most precisely, Mazi Dyke was required to stand in the council hall and correct the falsified death record himself, cross out his own wrong date with his own hand, write the true date beside it, witnessed by every elder present. Some consequences are designed for cells. This one was designed for a man whose entire power had lived inside the authority of his pen. The pen turned publicly against its own lies was a more complete destruction than any lock and key could have managed. Madame Ozina's ledger of invented debts was reviewed by a council auditor. 6 years of docked wages, calculated to the last coin, were returned to Nenena in full. The compound's trading license was suspended pending a fair wages review covering every worker on Madame Ozina's books. Before the council moved toward formal restoration, Nenena made 3 requests. First, permanent honored trader status for Malam Haruna in Uforo, with no gate fees for the remainder of his trading life. He had staked 40 years on her truth. The least she could return was an unobstructed road. Second, a room in the palace household for a days with a loom and the title of senior keeper of the royal cloth. A title earned 40 years ago and abandoned in an outer market enamel bowl deserved to come home. Third, enrollment in the palace trade school at the kingdom's cost for Tabena, the young apprentice she had once covered without being asked. He had promised to repay her when he could. She was releasing him from that debt entirely. Pay it forward, she told him. That was all. The Salt Throne's full restoration would take years and several more councils, but Nenena's name was restored, Ngozi's name was restored. The false record was corrected in permanent ink, and the kingdom of Ufuro began the long, slow work of understanding what it had buried in a salt compound wrapper for 28 years. Not a charity case, not a motherless traitor, not the floor's daughter. Salt does not lose its nature in the dust. Grind it underfoot, pack it in a poor woman's hem, lock it behind a compound gate and call it worthless, and still, the moment it meets what it was made for, it is exactly and completely what it has always been. Nothing the dust did changed a single grain. What was true in Nenena was true before anyone confirmed it, true while nobody believed it. True on the morning the fire finally showed the letters that had been waiting in the cloth all along. Now, before you leave this fire, one question to carry with you tonight. If you had been Nenena, what would you have asked for first? The title, the justice, or something else entirely? Tell me below. Every answer you write, I read every single one. Share this with one person before you sleep. Not a stranger, someone specific, someone whose name has been buried too long under someone else's wrong words. Send it to them tonight. Because a fire only becomes an ancestor when it travels further than the hand that first lit it. The next story is already burning. Come back and find it.